All right, Tony, would you like to introduce the webinar?
Yes, thank you, Stephen. Good evening. My name is Tony Banks with the Virginia Foundation for Agriculture Innovation and Rural Sustainability. And welcome to tonight's webinar, Collaborative Meat Processing Opportunities. Next slide, please, Stephen. Tonight, the presenters are going to be Dr. Stephen Richards, Director of the South Carolina Center for Cooperative and Enterprise Development, Jim Matson, Principal of Matson Consultant out of South Carolina, Thomas Beckett, the Executive Director of Carolina Common Enterprise, and myself, Tony Banks with Virginia Fairs. Tonight's presentation is essentially going to be an overview. I know a lot of times when we're working with individuals who want to pursue meat processing or enter into retail meat sales, you know, there are some misperceptions. So what we hope to do tonight is give everyone a general overview, and we realize that members of the audience are going to have different backgrounds and different experiences. So you know, based on the outcome of this evening, the different types of questions that we receive, and the interest, you know, afterwards, this could present, you know, an opportunity for us to come back and really drill down into specific topics. You know, for example, we could spend an entire afternoon discussing meat processing and not touch on anything else with respect to collaborative opportunities. And so we can see we have the agenda here with enterprise entry challenges, meat marketing, processing challenges and opportunities, regional, cooperative, or collaboratively owned meat enterprise, and then cooperatives versus other business ownership models. And then we'll wrap up with grants and other financial assistance options. And at that point, you know, time remaining, we will respond to questions. For the time being, if there's a topic or a question that you have as we're going through the presentation, type it in the chat box. You know, preferably if you can, put the speaker's first name with a colon and then ask the question if you want to direct it to a specific speaker. And then at the end, we will come back and try to roll through and answer those questions as best we can. Later this week, we will provide a link to the recording of the webinar. We will also provide a copy of the slide deck itself, as well as an FAQ from some of the questions that were received this evening. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Stephen.
Thanks, Tony. So I'm going to talk about opportunities and challenges for local meat products. So both the supply and the demand end. And I got a few slides here. Basically, I want to look at the entire local meat food system. So from producer to processor to distribution to the consumer. And I'm going to split this up and have a study for each of these specific sections. Really, the studies go all the way back to before COVID, or right after the local meat or the meat supply shortage and then the demand for local meats. Basically organized some studies, looked at producers first, then consumers, then processors, then restaurants and other wholesale outlets. And finally, the last study was really on market outlets and suggestions for moving the local meats and local proteins forward. So first off, let me talk about the Livestock Producer Survey, the demand side of the local meat food system. This is South Carolina based. As we move forward in some of the studies, that actually gets broader and broader, so includes North Carolina and Virginia. But in general, I think we saw a lot of the same things in all three of our states. In South Carolina, 47% of those that answered the survey sold some of their livestock as meat, which was a lot more than we had expected. We got a good response rate, 317 responses. I think we had sent it out to maybe 1,500. So that's really good for farmers, a really good response rate. Most sold their products through from their farm at farmers markets and direct to consumer. Advertising is mostly social media and word of mouth. And 60% of these folks saw processing capacity as a critical obstacle to the future of their business. And keep in mind, this 60% is everybody that responded, not just those that sold it as meat. So that means that others were looking to enter the market as an opportunity. Now, there's some demand numbers here. These are specific to South Carolina, but the two most critical constraints in South Carolina were beef and poultry. Now, poultry, you can pretty much do a lot of that on farm, but beef, not so much. And beef, being the largest animal and having to hang for a couple of weeks was definitely critically constrained in terms of processing capacity. Now, you can't really talk about capacity without talking what type of plant are we looking at and what capacity do they have. Basically, as mentioned before, almost 60% of chicken and 50% of the turkey were done on farm. So that's not really a capacity issue. But in terms of producer needs, if they're selling this meat to individuals within the state or outside the state, they need a different kind of processing. Custom exempt is actually non-inspected meat products where the person has to buy the animal first and then do the processing or hire the processor themselves. State inspected, that was 24%, and federal 46.8%. Almost everybody, 93%, was in favor of some legislation change that would allow state inspected products to cross state lines and be sold across state lines. And I have a slide next to basically give you an update or a recap of all the different inspections. People were in favor of legislation to change these laws, but that doesn't seem to be that's likely anytime soon. Just a recap of inspection types: federally inspected plants, basically you can sell this product in your state, outside your state, online, wholesale, that sort of thing. And in Virginia and North Carolina, they have what's called Talmadge-Aiken states, they are Talmadge-Aiken states, just to make it more confusing, but that's when the federal government hires state inspectors, and those state inspectors do federal inspection for the federal government, and that product is federally inspected. State inspected, there are some states that are state inspected that have joined the Cooperative Interstate Shipment Program, but not South Carolina, North Carolina, or Virginia. So those states are not able to sell across state lines. So they can only sell within state. Custom exempt, I mentioned that before. That's basically when you say it's freezer beef or freezer something, freezer pork. I'm buying an animal like in a half or a quarter. I'm going to arrange for the processing, and then it's labeled not for sale. So I actually own it before it's processed. And retail exempt is actually for grocery stores and other retail sites where they're allowed to do a certain amount of processing under the USDA, that they can sell the meat direct to consumer, and they don't have to have a federal inspector on site. Okay, going back to the producers, of those that were polled, 72% said they were interested in the idea of collaborating in beef finishing operations and willing to invest. 70% were also interested in collaborative processing operations, because of course, you have to finish the beef first. We're a cow-calf state in South Carolina, and I believe Virginia and North Carolina are very much the same. And then future presenters can correct me on that. But 78% said they're willing to invest in collaborative slaughter operations, hence the meeting today. Invest though was only 1,000 to 4,000. So we'll see what Jim's numbers say next on how much that would actually have to be. Okay, we can't really define the entire problem without saying, hey, what do the meat processors say about this? So interviewed the meat processors in South Carolina, just interviewed the ones that took local animals, not like the ones that are in the major supply chain, the grocery store supply chain, the meat that's there. Basically, they agreed that hanging and cooling capacity for beef was an issue. Poultry processing, there was no state outlet for, to do it actually in a facility, had to be federally inspected or not. And harvest floor capacity, you can't do multi-species without clean up and basically set the thing back up. So different days for different animals. But aside from those things, skilled labor, aging of the owners of the plants, Those two were two things that came out that we didn't really expect. Cannot find enough meat cutters, especially when you're talking about beef, where it takes a lot more skill than some other animals. And then who's going to buy this plant when I'm gone? Who's going to want to operate, manage this plant when I retire is another big thing. And finally, the biggest third surprise was custom exempt, basically deer processing, barbecue pigs for individuals. That was a larger part of the market than we expected, at least in South Carolina. It was at least 35%. So we do definitely have different markets here. Those that are selling their cuts retail and those that are selling their animals custom exempt. Also, this is maybe a moot point for Virginia and North Carolina, but in South Carolina, we want to reboot the meat processors to re-up their association so that they have a voice with farmers groups, Farm Bureau, with legislators in Columbia, and where they, the legislatures in the other states. That's what they do with the meat processors association. So that's something we wanted to assist with, because here we're talking about this problem and we're only hearing from the producer's end, but we're not necessarily hearing from the processors because they're busy cutting animals up and things like that, right? So finally, did a restaurant survey. This is actually national, but it included coastal states because I actually wanted to look at seafood. So Virginia and North Carolina are both included in this survey. Restaurants move a lot of protein. And depending on what kind of protein it is, what species, between 27% and 47% is consumed in a restaurant, which I thought was pretty amazing when I first looked at these numbers. So we want to say, hey, this is one of them prime outlets for local proteins. Why aren't we in here more often? One thing that we saw was that the restaurants, they basically wanted all natural, hormone-free, certified organic. And we'll see some customer details next, which will line those up and go into that a little bit more depth. They're more likely to purchase local meats. Restaurants that are more likely to purchase local meats are smaller restaurants. They have higher entree costs. They've been in business longer, and they're more likely to be located in the northern US. And I think that's just how the local food trends is gone around the United States, kind of a clockwise fashion. Started in California, went up to the East Coast, and then now it's going down the South. Those restaurants that are more willing to pay higher prices for local meat products are those that are fine dining, serve alcohol, which probably means they serve dinner, and they cater to local residents, not tourists. And I thought that was a really interesting fact. The restaurants, basically, they're willing to pay a small premium. The premium that they're willing to pay is between 1% and 24% over what they're currently paying. The barriers to buying local proteins were inconsistent quality, high prices, and inconsistent supply. And so it says, inconsistent quality, what are you talking about? Well, if we're looking at the beef question here, look at all these different ribeyes, and you tell me, if you're a restaurant and you're serving ribeyes sourcing from a local producer and you get something different each time, that could be an issue, correct? And that is another reason why collaborative, either beef finishing or processing, things like that would be a benefit to the producers trying to get in restaurants, because you can have standards and ways to make it more consistent, and the supply as well, not just quality. The other thing too about producers that were selling local meat, 69% had limited or no freezer space, and 88% had limited or no refrigerated transportation. So that's another key point of the supply chain in local meats that we're going to have to solve. The final piece of the studies that I'm going to review with you tonight is the final consumer. So availability, demand, and price. So just asking the consumers, where would you prefer to buy local proteins? Number one answer is grocery stores. So they want convenience, right? Farm is next, farm market, butcher shop, and then last is buying online. So buying online wasn't, it was ranked last. So a lot of us are thinking about shipping online, but it may not be as big of a market segment as we thought. 83% are not willing to travel more than 20 miles to purchase local proteins. So that's something else. So the on-farm marketing might be limited by that. These consumers also wanted no growth hormones, all natural, no antibiotics. And you see how they're ranked there: grass-fed, range, knowing the farmer was last, which is interesting because we always say, you have to know the farmer and all this. I think that is more for the follow-up sale. You get to know the producer, you've tasted their product. This is good stuff. I'm coming back. Knowing the farmer for the first point of sale or first sale, not as important. 25% of these consumers had purchased non-inspected meats. So there's that market again. So it is a significant market share. And most were not concerned about food safety. And I imagine this is because most meat products are sold frozen, local meat products. And here I lined up restaurant buyers and consumers. So the restaurant buyers, that's the person that's actually buying for the restaurant. That was the previous survey. Sometimes it gets confusing that I'm talking about the customer in the restaurant and the customer for retail. No. So the restaurant buyer, for one of the things that was higher up on the list was the fact they wanted certified organic. And probably any certification is something they're going to be looking for because they need to make sure when they put it on the menu that that's the way it's raised, correct? Whereas you're hand selling, retailing at a farmer's market, you can talk about your raising methods and all that, and maybe you do not need a certification, not as important. What can we do to encourage more purchases? Home consumption. This is, again, the final consumer. Price was a big one. Availability, basically 2 and 3. Trusted local supplier, availability. Restaurants, consumers are like, hey, I would buy it in a restaurant if restaurants served it. So really it was availability. And then prices after that, but pretty much availability and price for both restaurant and home purchases were barriers. Here's a graph of willingness to pay. You can see I've got all little local proteins up there. To be honest, the gray bar, 1 to 25% more, that's the people were generally willing to pay that to consume it at home, but some were willing to pay less than that or the same as what other meats cost, and some were willing to pay more, but you can see that the gray bar is the most common response. Willingness to pay at a restaurant. Honestly, consumers were, it's almost a tie of $1 to $1.99 more per entree with cost the same, but cost the same is the most common response. So not a huge premium there, which lends itself to maybe needing to move more volume to get to the restaurant channel and take a little bit of price hit so that restaurants can make some money too. Now, if you look at just who consumes versus who does not consume local meat, the only two significant variables that I could pull out of the statistical analysis, were those basically younger folks and folks that had higher household income. Now, if you look at who's more willing to pay a premium for local meats, so this is a subset of those that actually consume it, right? Frequency of consumption, we had significant variables of larger household sizes, higher education, females, and actually living in the tenure, the amount of time somebody lived in the state was significant. And I think that has to do with the freezer market where you have to know the farmer, you have to know the processor, you buy the animal ahead of time and you take the processor. It's that custom exempt market, right? Willingness to pay at home, basically lower age, higher education, gender was mixed depending on the species, same at a restaurant. And then finally, those that are willing to try are those that had a little bit smaller household size and maybe those that haven't been here long enough because they haven't discovered where to buy it. All right, so finally, the last, tying it all together. What does this mean? Basically, there's some market constraints along with processing constraints. So processing is a constraint, but at the same time, this is what I'm talking to producers with in South Carolina and with the Center for Cooperative Development that Jim and I are with. Basically, we want to grow the market at the same time we're growing processing capacity, because if you look at the headwinds against local meat products, the general meat consumer, the demographic variables are actually the opposite of those of the local meat consumer. So people that tend to eat more meat in general Their household income is lower, their education is lower, and they tend to be male. Those that eat local meats at a higher frequency, they have higher household income. They're younger, they're more educated, and their gender's female. So we're already looking at a little mismatch between conventional and local. Consumption is also limited by location. Again, not willing to pay or drive more than 20 miles to the location to buy the product. Very few restaurants offer the product. Price is an issue because 1 to 24% premium. If there's some meat producers in the audience, I imagine that the premium they're charging is higher than 24%. So that limits the market further. And finally, convenience, convenience, convenience. Even being sold frozen is a convenience issue for some people. This is actually right from the USDA, but it shows how what percent of agricultural products are sold direct to consumer and what channel they go through. I'd like to point this out, and I'll just do it quickly, but this 39%, the dark blue, the largest piece of the pie is intermediaries. So most consumers or most farmers selling direct to consumers are selling through an intermediary, which is basically a processor, a wholesale, a food hub, a cooperative. So that's a good way to do it. Others sell direct to retailer, and then finally direct to consumer is basically a third and third and third. If you think about farm markets too, so that's the second or third most popular way to buy local meat products. Even if you wanted to get all of your groceries at the farmer's market, it's almost logistically impossible, isn't it? Unless you had like a lineup, like Monday it's this location, Tuesday's this, Wednesday this. When you need something, you go to the grocery store a lot of times. People visit the grocery store 2.5 times per week. They visit the grocery or the farmer's market 1 to 2 times a month. So just the statistics right there show you that we're limited trying to get this meat in the consumer's hands. Online sales are a good way to sell some products, but even though there's been large growth in this category, it's still only 3.2% of all meat sales in the United States, and that includes Omaha Steaks and all the big players. Maybe delivery might be somewhere in between. Again, most people don't want to drive too far. So this is just kind of a bar chart that shows what is the gray bar's potential demand, like per capita meat consumption. So just an average, how much each person in the US consumes pounds of meat. If we narrow this down by the demographics that I talked about, how the demographics are different, you can see the orange bar lowers it a little bit. Actually, chicken goes up a teeny weeny bit. Home adjustment, meaning I can only buy it for home consumption because it's not in restaurants. That lowers it by quite a bit, big deal. And then the willingness to pay. Most local meats are priced about 50% higher, 35 to 50% higher. So that's what I took there. And so you can see the blue bar is much, much smaller. So we're looking at a niche product in most instances for locally raised meats. So how can we increase sales? Well, we need more retail sites, and we need to get in grocery stores and restaurants. Basically, that's how we're going to move a lot. We can increase the convenience of farmers markets by increasing the hours that it's open, the locations, the days of operations, the payment options, things like that. But that's still going to be difficult. So more retail buying points are needed. So some of the things that we've been talking about in South Carolina with getting producers together is actually a retail storefront or a way that restaurants can source from a number of producers, things like that. So when you're thinking about this with the rest of the presentations, you see how maybe some of these solutions are a cooperative effort and not just processing. It could be cooperative marketing. Raise awareness for local meats through local labeling. We've got Virginia's certified Virginia grown, certified SC grown, and got to be NC. And convenience, convenience, convenience. Make it easy to find, easy to buy, easy to prepare. That's the name of the game. And if you look at trends just in general consumption of almost any food, that's what you see, certainly in meats. Again, the target customers, mentioned those earlier in the presentation, but they're younger, higher household income, married, so they're at least married and may or may not have kids. They have a slightly larger household, female buyers. Restaurants, smaller, fine dining, locally owned, serve alcohol, have higher than average entree prices, don't cater to tourists. And further items to consider, I'll let Jim, this is kind of a segue into what Jim's going to talk about next, but certainly supplying a new facility is a key thing that we need to all think about. Everybody kind of wants to do their own thing. And so that might be quite tricky. So I'm going to put my contact information up here. I've gone right about what time limit I promised. And I see there are some chats in the box that I'll answer at the end. And then my email and phone numbers here. If you'd like to contact me directly. But thanks for listening to me tonight. I'll turn it over to Jim Matson.
Here we go. I got to get to where I am with the study. Hold on a second. I've got the wrong, I'm grabbing the wrong side right now. Let me zoom down to the right section here. Stop the share and open up the other file real fast. There we go, a little bit better. There we go. So I'm Jim Matson. I wanted to check. I've got just a few minutes, and I guess we're talking a little bit about finance and what's looking about on the plant side and this. And I think there's some questions about facilities and other things. And we just wanted to hit a couple quick points super fast. I think we have about 10 minutes set up to talk about this. And wanted to check in with some of the numbers we had done and had pulled from some of the studies. We've been looking at these for about 20 years for some of the things on staffing and facility side. I want to come back with some decent numbers later, but I wanted to use this slide to talk about the fact that also, and Steve alluded to this, of how hard it is to come up with cutters and other things, that there's a huge, deficit in training in schools of folks finding the people to cut it, but also on the skilled area of the managers and facility staff, those areas in blue, there's been a big deficit in trying to find folks like that. So we've been finding that facility can be hard. And you have, particularly on smaller facilities, you may have almost as many people back office as you had out on the floor dealing with the animals and that level with it. So when we're talking about plant building, there's been a lot of information looked at it. And this is just to kind of give a glance that over the past, 20 years, even before the inflation that we're having, the post-COVID and the supply chain stuff, we've had costs go up by almost 3 times over the past, 20, 25 years ago. So the cost structure of those facilities makes a huge difference. And putting in a new facility today, like I say, this is starting at 22, but I think as we put in the current quarters and next quarters, we're definitely going to see a huge spike in numbers. So I would suspect that some of these numbers could be going up by as much as 20% on the cost structure, trying to get some things done right now. Just with the large increases we're having, we still have some tariffs on steels and other thing that makes it trickier for the cost of putting some of these in, as well as competition. A lot of people are looking at these plants, which means the suppliers of the equipment and designs are bidding their prices up as well. In 2020, with Virginia Fairs, we did a study trying to look at what could impact some of the facility cost and what was going on, and comparing some of the studies that we had out there. And there were lots of studies. We tried to take about 14 that were kind of the most consistent, and I would call sort of general plans that were sort of, cut and killed without a whole lot of special value added activities and other things to try to get some numbers. And then we adjusted those costs to a 2020 price figure. So again, I would probably adjust all these numbers here if I'm putting it in 2022 numbers from, a 2019 number, again, I would probably add a good 20% to everything we're looking at here, if not 25% of what everything's costing. And then we divided things in what we call, sort of small plants versus what we were calling medium-sized plants, just based on the sizing and square footing, and looking that you're gonna, need a facility for a smaller plant. It wasn't so much smaller on the scale of the plant floor size, rather on the small of the animals running through. You see it's running, about 2,500 square foot smaller, but it's running through, 1,000 animals versus sort of 2,500 animals is what we're looking at. And we looked at this. I'm doing these on beef numbers. When you get to some of the costs for multi-species, I know there's a lot of interest in multi-species. The plant numbers themselves are fairly consistent. Your equipment cost and that tends to go up. So a lot of the same type of conclusions that we're looking at, just quickly running across these, are the same when you're looking at multi-species as well. If you're seeing here, kind of looking at it, we're looking at jobs that were created from these studies of what they were saying with it. The small plants are saying about 7 jobs, so you're not getting a huge economic boom just from the facility itself. But of course, these are direct jobs. This isn't measuring any of the indirect or economic multipliers that development folks love so much. These are just looking at the direct jobs in the facility itself. So, and that an average facility would be running, about $250,000, $260,000 of labor cost per year. And at the cost, your labor cost, per head running through it is a couple hundred dollars per year. Now, if you notice that, the larger facilities are more than doubling those jobs, so that you're spending more roles and you're getting those mainly on the production floor, the way you're looking at those jobs when you're getting there. But you see that, the labor cost per head is coming down, to about half of what it is. And so you're seeing a big difference in, that, the improvements to scales and all that. I think some people were asking about whether this could be, if there could be potential for a regional plan and this sort of thing. And that's where some of these numbers could help to look at, that is one of the areas that you are getting more efficiencies to scale on these facilities, on this size point, that you definitely go up to a different level of cost and what it's looking at, per animal for your numbers flowing through there. Not shocking when you look at this, and this is sort of normalized across, what's it costing. The chart on the left is a small plant, and the chart on the right is a large plant. So if you see, for a large plant, you're spending a lot more money on capital originally to put up the facility. And then, per area, equipment is dropping quite a bit less, because you're running more animals through basically the same amount of equipment. On the right, of course, larger that. What's interesting is that your labor cost, when you're sort of looking at it, is not very different per head as a percentage of your overall cost. Even though that number is higher due to the inefficiency of a smaller plant compared with a larger size one or medium sized one, it's still coming about 20% of your total cost. So I just wanted to put that one up as sort of a comparison of where you're running real fast on these numbers, across several different studies. And again, when you're looking at your own individual plan, I will say, of course, labor numbers are going to differ and areas are going to differ what you're looking at. And so I just ran looking at this to say, and I would call this kind of a best case type of scenario of what it could cost to do some financing. If you can have somebody step in and you're looking at it, where can it be if you're running one of the USDA loans? I know USDA right now on the grants thing, and Tony will mention this later, does have some 90% financing on a couple of programs, but really by the time they get down to what happens in the program, 80 is probably about the maximum you're going to end up in most cases, where you can run. And you see, if anybody could get 4% interest rate today, I would say grab it quickly and run. I think those numbers are probably going away, but just to give you something optimistic about where you're looking at numbers, and I'll let the numbers sit there for a second, but while they're there, one of the interesting things that comes up, and where Stephen was mentioning, if you're looking at producer investment or having individual investment on this, even if you're getting, on that 5,000 head plant, you're still going to need money from people that are in it of, about $672 per head just to pay the building costs. This is not covering operating expenses, but this is just that loan amount to get the facility, built. So no operating capital. And then down with the smaller 1,000 head plant, you're looking at about $170, dollars per head of where it's going. So, there's some areas that people say, well, that would be more attractive. I'd like to put up less money within there. But, part of the issue that happens is when you start looking at just doing a cut and kill facility at only 1,000 head per year, well, you end up, covering your operating costs, but you really don't have enough money then to pay your depreciation over time. So as your equipment and whatnot breaks, as you go through your useful life of that equipment, you're running that down and ending up losing several $1,000s a year for depreciation, when you're looking at it. So, at 1,000 head a year, that's about 20 head a week, running it if you're assuming about a 50 weeks of operation. And of course, these are with the numbers for, from that, if you add 25% on top of this, you can look at how these numbers are going to be even slightly worse, slightly more, getting more negative on these areas, at 2,500, head a year, you're covering your depreciation and just in what I would call sort of breaking water and treading even. You're not making any money, but you're sort of, breaking even now. There are things that you can do to change some of this, on the revenue side. Again, this is just a basic, looking at cut and kill. If you're doing value added stuff and smoking and other processes and working at it, we're just trying to give you sort of a vanilla figure or a flag that we're putting up in the air so y'all can shoot at the numbers a little bit on it is the purpose of this. So, I'm sure all of these numbers are wrong, but it's, to give you an idea of where we're looking at based on these studies and the expenses coming across with it there. And you see, running across it, it's, some of those other pieces that we're running as fairly minimal on some of these operational costs of selling and marketing being, at that small facility that you're only paying $10,000 a year for selling and marketing. It's probably about the minimum you're going to be able to get away with something like that. That means you're having people come in and cut and process, and you're not spending any money. That doesn't put you any billboards up on the interstate as we're running through there. But just to give you some idea of the difference in that cost, that trade-off between sort of cost and investment, trading, and sort of some of the heads that you need to look at if you're trying to set up and sort of, greenfield a facility before you're looking at how it could cost with those numbers in there. That's kind of my contact information. And like I say, there's more information in the study we did before and, numbers floating around with it. But I just wanted to do a quick hit that, begin to talk about some numbers that are out there and where come the cost to be. The last thing I wanted to say when looking at those numbers are, of course, those are based on annual numbers and operating 50 weeks a year. One of the issues that often happens in the Southeast is, making sure that a facility has animals to go into it that period of the year. Nobody wants to be typically killing animals in, February. Everybody wants to have them for the holidays, and nobody wants to be killing them late summer as everybody goes to the beach. So part of the thing of these plants to make the plant work number-wise is, you have to be operating pretty close to those 50 weeks a year at that level because you see there's not a whole lot of margin even at the largest facility, that if you miss a couple of weeks where you're not operating optimally, suddenly even those facilities don't look very profitable. So it's a tough business, but I just want to pass on some of the numbers. And with that, I will be quiet and mute myself. And I think Thomas is up next to chat about some ways that maybe people can come together and help you share some of the burden on that.
Thanks very much, Jim. Let's see, now it's time for me to find my slides and let's get this show on the road. So thanks for all being here tonight. I'm Tom Beckett, and with Carolina Common Enterprise, we're a cooperative development center. So we help people around the state and sometimes outside the state start cooperative businesses to help have more control over their own economic circumstances. And so right now we've seen a pretty good demonstration that there is a market opportunity for a meat processing facility in this region, this mid-Atlantic, southern Piedmont area, and that there is an upside potentially for farmers to participate in that. And so the question for me to help y'all answer is, how do we go about doing that? And I am a promoter of cooperatives as a way of doing business for farms, for other types of businesses, because with a cooperative, everybody can do much better working together than they can on their own. If you think about, where you sit in the value chain now as a, as between the farm and the consumer, you are just the farm, and you may have the opportunity to sell direct to consumers, to customers at a farm gate or at a farm stand or at a farmer's market, but you're still in a position where you go to another meat processing facility. There's a cost with that, and then you come back and are able to sell your products. If farmers can get together and own the meat processing facility themselves, it creates a lot more opportunities to sell farm products, to sell your livestock, and it at a lower cost. So the question is, how do we start a business together, given the significant investment and operating costs that Jim Matson outlined? So I want to suggest that a cooperative could work in this situation, and look at a couple other configurations as well. But let's start with what is a cooperative? And the International Cooperative Alliance, a global body of cooperative organizers, has this definition that a cooperative is an autonomous association of persons united voluntarily to meet their common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations through a jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprise. That is a mouthful, and I don't need to repeat that tonight. I'm going to boil it down for you a little bit. Basically, a co-op is a business that's owned and democratically controlled by the same group of people who use its products or services for their shared benefit. And what this cooperative does is it allows people to do their business in the context of a larger business, have more economic opportunity, lower cost of doing it, and to be able to potentially operate at a much larger scale. So we have what we call the use principles, where a co-op is a business that's owned by the users, democratically controlled by the users, and for the benefit of the users. What's missing from that equation is basically investors who don't actually participate in the business, investors who don't do the work. This is for the people that do the work, for the people that provide the value. Internationally, cooperatives have a statement of values as well. These values include self-help, self-responsibility, democracy, equality, equity, and solidarity, and honesty, openness, and social responsibility, and caring for others. So I don't think that's a set of values that anyone could really disagree with. But what that gets us is that a cooperative is a values-driven business, that it's owned by and for the people who make use of the business. And so they are sharing the investment, they are sharing the responsibility for the business, and then sharing the benefit, sharing the upside. So what that gets us also is, it's a business where everyone has an equal say. One person, one share, one vote. That is to say, the people vote and the money doesn't. So you have more control over the business, more control over your farm operations, because you're not answering to arbitrary decisions by some distant set of investors. So in addition to what a cooperative is, a cooperative is not any kind of a charity. It is a business. It is an enterprise. It is a business that operates at its own cost. It doesn't exist to provide return on investment, but it is not a nonprofit. It is not a charity. And it's not something for investors to make money from by virtue of having money. So the question here is, Steve and Jim have outlined the value chain here in meat production. And the question is, where do you sit in the value chain, and where do you want to sit in the value chain? And when you are at the very beginning of the value chain, every step along the way adds value, adds more to the end price. And all of the players along that value chain, as they add to the price, they're taking money out. So if you can occupy more of the value chain, you get to take more out yourself. So one reason, a main reason to have a cooperative, is the more you can do yourselves, the more of that value that you produce, you actually get to keep. And then likewise, the more you are able to do yourselves in expanding into the value chain, the more control you can have over the timing and the circumstances of your farm business. Because again, you're not answering to the demands of an arbitrary outside business. It's also important to recognize, that an investor-owned meat processing facility exists to make money for the investors. But a cooperative meat processing facility exists to provide benefit to the farmers that are the members of it, that own it. And that benefit is to help them make more money, not outside investors. Because this cooperative business is basically the producers owning more of the value chain, there is more of that value, more of that money that is retained for the membership and then for the surrounding communities as well, because that money is not getting pulled out to Wall Street or Charlotte or other places. So you can also, and I don't have this in the slide, but a co-op can provide production standards and more easily help its members raise their livestock and then process the meats consistently to meet demands of a market, and therefore fetch better prices. I think it was Steve pointed out that there's a lot of inconsistency in direct sales, a lot of inconsistency that restaurants in particular are concerned about, retailers, specialty retailers. So having a cooperative basically handle all those consistency and quality standards for you creates more value of the end product as well. So, and then likewise, a cooperative can provide the members with training, with education on those standards, so that the producers themselves can do a better job of raising the livestock that the market wants. So, and then it's always important to note, and it's more of a softer thing, but co-ops build a community around the people that work in the co-op and work with the co-op, because it's for their benefit. It's not just for the next quick dollar. So in addition to cooperatives, there are other ways of doing this at different configurations and different scales. A cooperative is a very specific union of ownership and use and control and benefit of a group of people. Not necessarily the best fit in all circumstances. So other categories we generally call collaborative farming. It is a farming business where two or more farms can work together to obtain a higher profitability, to have a better piece of the value chain, not necessarily in the cooperative context. And there's different deals, different degrees of that. A handshake deal, just an understanding with your neighbor in terms of sharing resources or working together to get a production contract, those types of things. Very informal is collaborative farming. And if you want to sort of level up in complexity and the scale of what you're doing, have some written agreement or contractual agreements between partners to share equipment, share land leases, share farm labor, things like that can help you run your farm more efficiently and more economically without being a cooperative, but still important types of business relationships to have. And if you want to step it up further, form a business together. It doesn't have to be a cooperative. It can be more investor oriented, but have that value added, have that meat processing business operate more as a conventional investor driven business. There's different ways of doing that too. But in any case, and probably especially in cooperation, there are some challenges that come with the territory, because this is a business. It is not a bed of roses. There are market conditions. There's competition. There are costs of capital, costs of equipment, things like that. So just having this business together increases the level of complexity of what you have to do for your farm business. An important challenge, and really the first thing to address with starting a cooperative, is you have to cooperate. You have to be able to get along with others in situations where your farm product and money are at stake. And so that takes a bit of getting used to for some people, because what you're doing is in order to have a greater control over the market, your market position, and how your farm works, you still have to give up some control to this common enterprise in exchange for obtaining that benefit. And so a lot of farmers aren't quite used to giving up control to others in that way. So that can be a challenge. And then likewise, being in a cooperative takes a commitment. You need to be loyal to the cooperative. You need to, in order for the cooperative to work effectively, keep your promises of production and participation. And so that's a commitment you have to make. And sometimes that means that it's important to gently and firmly hold other members to their commitments as well. So those are things to keep in mind. With starting a cooperative, it's not going to be your granddad's cooperative. It's back in the post-war period, the economy was high, opportunity was great, and it was easy to make a good business with cooperatives that were run by just the local members, essentially amateur and volunteer managers. But as competition increased, as Wall Street extended its influence and grip in more competitive conditions, co-ops did not necessarily fare so well. So this is an entrepreneurial undertaking, and it's a collective group of farmers doing it, but it has to be run like a business. It has to be run not by the farmers on a day-to-day basis. Farmers are good at farming. We want to set this up so the farmers can do what they do best, but that you have skilled managers running the production facility. I believe it was Jim Mattson actually showed a organizational chart of the types of positions was necessary to run a good facility like this. So to start a business like a cooperative, you need to have that well-defined business opportunity. We've seen already there's a really good likelihood that this business opportunity exists here in this region for meat producing farmers. But with that business opportunity, you need to understand what it is you're getting into and everybody be on the same page. You need to have a shared purpose in going after that opportunity when you get together and do that. And so when I say everybody needs to be on the same page, that's in a literal sense. You need to write down so that everybody knows what they're agreeing to, that purpose, and eventually that business plan and that contract of agreement. So that written commitment is really important for starting a cooperative too, from the get-go. It may be in the course of developing it, you kind of change direction, you fine-tune things, but you really need everybody to be on board in the same way, to the same degree of commitment from the get-go. And it does require that people do more than they're doing now with their own farms in order to create this better opportunity, that everybody needs to step up and do some of the work of starting the business. But that's part of the equation of a cooperative, is a bunch of people getting together to do the work, make it easier for everybody individually to benefit from it. So as you are starting a cooperative, you need to start with a business plan and a market feasibility study. And some of the presenters today have a really good handle on making feasibility studies, because you want to make sure that this apparent market opportunity is really valid, that there is a good, better than reasonable chance that this business is going to have positive cash flow, that this business is going to succeed. And that takes a bit more research. You want to put a finer point on it than we've got right now, so that everybody who's making that commitment can have some actual reassurance that they're going to get something in return for that commitment. And so that's a checkpoint. Is this feasibility study valid? Is this going to market opportunity going to work? And so that's a green light, red light moment once that feasibility study is returned. The next thing is, if this business is viable, then are we really going to get a solid buy-in from everybody who's going to participate? And is that level of commitment enough to make the business work as well? So everybody needs to be prepared to buy in financially. One person, one share, one vote. Well, you got to buy that share in order to have the business in the first place. You've got to participate, got to contribute your time. Initially, that may require more time in the planning stages, but along the way, every member wants to be involved to some degree in understanding how the business is performing, more than just delivering their livestock to the loading dock. And then technical things like, and I'm an attorney, so I love these technical things, what type of business entity do you want to use? And we've got 3 states represented here. What state's law do we want to take advantage of? And so there's some questions to be addressed there in terms of choice of business entity. It could be that there's a cooperative corporation statute that's a good fit for what we want to do. It could be it may make more sense to do it as incorporate as an LLC, structured as a cooperative. And then finally, you need to have the advice of a good accountant that understands agriculture and cooperatives in order to create the best, the most optimal tax relationship with the Internal Revenue Service and whatever state tax authorities might be present. So given all that, you need to remember that you need to have a firm agreement among all the members. You want to set this business up so that managers, and meat production experts can run the business, and the farmers can supervise, but don't need to be involved in the day-to-day management. And that requires some transparent financial structures. You want to have reporting and financial management that you can trust. You want to make sure that the business decisions, the governance, is run fairly and cleanly so that all the members do benefit, and so that all decisions are obvious to all the members, and that so all the members can actually participate and have a say. But also just, that the promises the members keep, that they make, are kept, and that the members lovingly hold each other accountable to their commitments. So that gets us back to the statement of cooperative values. And I want to focus here on the word solidarity, because it's the working together that makes a cooperative work. And so you've got to think about where you want to sit in the value chain. And if you want to move from just the farm to higher up in the value chain, you're going to have to work together with other farmers to some degree. So when every farmer does better, when all of the farmers do better together, that is solidarity. And I believe that is the end of my presentation. I want to thank you for your attention. I have not been paying attention to the chat, but I'm happy to answer questions. Kelly Liddington also works with me. Some of you Virginia folks may remember him as well from Extension. And we are available to help cooperatives get started. And now I'm going to stop my screen share.
All righty. Somebody please tell me if you don't see my screen. Again, my name is Tony Banks. I'm with the Virginia Foundation for Agricultural Innovation and Rural Sustainability. And likewise, we are also a Rural Cooperative Development Center. And I'm going to close out the presentation discussing some of the various grant and financing programs that are available. And there we go. First, we're going to start out with the new USDA meat and poultry programs. Last summer, USDA Ag Marketing Service rolled out the Meat and Poultry Inspection Readiness Grant Program, and that was basically a grant for up to $200,000 for those facilities that were not under federal or not under USDA inspection coverage. And the intent there was to help those facilities maybe expand on their existing facility with some construction. It was not for new construction, but for expansion or remodeling, equipment and supplies that would be necessary to come under federal inspection and also under Talmadge-Aiken. That was going to be considered an equivalent inspection coverage. So the round 2 deadline, which had roughly 22.6 or $23 million this year that was left over from last. The deadline for that is, I believe it's midnight tonight. So we'll just move on from that. I will add one final thing. According to AMS last year, if there were any monies left over after these first 2 rounds, they might possibly release the final in 2023 for another RFA at that point in time. Meat and Poultry Processing Expansion Program. This was a brand new program that was released back in February of this year. It was essentially $150 million of gap financing for those projects that were either just getting ready to break ground or maybe had just recently broken ground. And the intent there was to help cover some costs and make sure that these facilities made it over the line, made it over the finish line. Applicants were eligible for 20% of the total project cost up to $25 million. That is a $125 million project when you look at those upper limits. And again, this was intended for processors that were not within the top 4 or 5 firms for the specific species. And so this was definitely for the regional and medium and small size facilities. The issue was that when they came up, released it on February 24th, there was a 6-week turnaround time, and that generated a lot of interest, and it did require a rather diligent feasibility study. It was a little bit more involved than what is typically requested by USDA. And although the agency was saying that there was no match requirement, as an applicant, you did have to verify or confirm that you had the other 80% financing in-house, or on hand rather. So for some individuals and some groups who saw this February 24th It was a little bit bitter to find out that there really just wasn't enough time to pull that together. Eventually, USDA did extend the deadline to May 11th, but that may have helped some applicants, but by and large, it really didn't extend that to a significant number of new projects. On here I have the website. If you go to usda.gov/meet, you'll see a listing of all the new programs that's going to be for grants, new financing, as well as other programs and policy initiatives that USDA is pursuing to encourage local small and medium meat and poultry processing programs. Also new is phase two. Phase two of the meat and poultry processing expansion program is another $225 million. And USDA is expected to release the request for applications in September of the, or excuse me, not September, in the summer of 2022. And as of right now, we don't really know any details about the program, and other than it's supposed to help finance facilities that want to come online and again come under federal inspection. So you can go to usda.gov/meet. You look up under pending programs, meat and poultry processing expansion program, and that would be a good place where you can sign up for email alerts as to the status of that program. And before I forget, when you go to this website, different agencies, whether it's rural development or agricultural marketing service, different agencies are sponsoring these programs. So if you sign up for an email alert for one program, you may not necessarily be receiving emails for all of the programs that are listed on that page. So I would encourage you to go and sign up for the email alert for each program that you're interested in, and not just one. Another program that is out right now is the Meat and Poultry Intermediary Lending Program. That's $275 million. And this money is technically, it's being made available to banks and lenders that typically provide these types of loans to entities that want to go into this sort of business. And those the banks and other lenders have until June of this year to submit their applications in order to compete for this 275 million. And the intent there is to make sure that those lending institutions have access to capital to make these types of investments. Food supply chain guaranteed loan program. Jim mentioned this earlier. It's listed as a 90% loan guarantee program. They made roughly $100 million available, and that could be anything from processing meat to producing orange juice. However, they have carved out 19 million that is specifically for meat and poultry processing. And so to access this loan, you actually don't go to USDA, you go to a lender that participates in USDA guaranteed loan servicing. And you would actually enter into the loan agreement with the bank, and USDA would provide the guarantee that to that lender for either 80 to 90% of that loan value. Those loans can be used for processing, aggregation, and distribution. Workforce development is another new program that I believe they just announced this today. They're seeking proposals from different entities to provide workforce training for meat processing and butchery. And so that you look for those programs to begin rolling out probably later this fall as some of those announcements begin to take shape. The innovation and technical assistance, that is that money was split roughly 25% for innovative proposals that needed some capital to see those advance, and another 25,000 that's intended to be technical assistance. And the technical assistance grants have been awarded to 6 entities around the country. And again, you can look those entities up at usda.gov/meet. They do provide technical assistance in the form of information, and they can help, perhaps help guide you through some of the application processes. But insofar as completing an application for an individual, or creating a feasibility study or a business plan that's going to be required by some of these different programs, to my knowledge, they are not in the business of doing that at this point. Meat and poultry processing research is another new program that's aimed to look at ways to modernize meat and poultry processing and increase or rather improve cost efficiencies there. And then also grant application and management assistance, which I don't believe they have rolled that out yet. But it's like I said, you register for the email follow-ups at that site, and as these programs become available, you'll hear about them. I'm going to take a breath here, and we're going to shift into some of the traditional funding sources that USDA has to offer. The Value-Added Producer Grant Program has been around now probably 20 plus years. It requires a 50% match. They have grants for up to $75,000 for conducting feasibility studies and developing business plans and marketing plans. You can also explore different types of business structures that either you as an individual or a group of producers would like to pursue. And once you have that feasibility study in hand, and it will need to be a independent third party study that's specific to your operation, then you can pursue an implementation grant of up to $200,000, and that money can be basically used for soft costs. If all you want to do is sell meat and hire somebody else to slaughter and process and package it for you, then you can obtain assistance there to help with those processing costs, or you can get help with your marketing costs, or maybe you need to hire someone to make deliveries. They can help with that. They will not pay for equipment or construction. Rural development business, the Rural Business Development Grant is another program that is housed within rural development, 25% match up to $500,000. This grant can be used for purchasing equipment as well as construction. What you would need to do here is work with the locality or another nonprofit entity, but ideally a locality that would basically be the sponsor, and you would partner with them to secure this type of funding. Community Facilities Direct Loan and Grant, it's and the Rural Economic Development Loan and Grant. These are other programs, again, ideally you need to work with your local government to access these. And in the case of the Rural Economic Development Loan and Grant, you may also work with your local electric cooperative. A lot of those operate those grants as well. Business and Industry Grant Loan Program, that is actually the program, the food processing grant loan program that we talked about earlier. That's just a generalized program. It's the same basic program. I believe the standard loan guarantee there is 80%, and that you would go through the local lender to access those loans. Socially disadvantaged groups grant. If you are a member of a socially disadvantaged group and you want to form a co-op, or if there is a co-op that's working to help a socially disadvantaged group to enter into meat processing or other ventures as well, not just meat processing, then the SDGG is one alternative there to go, an alternative way to go. And I believe the upper limit on that is roughly $175,000. USDA Agricultural Marketing Service, the Local Food Promotion Program, and the Farmers Market Program, they're sister programs. They're normally announced simultaneously. They require a 25% match of the federal funds requested, and you can receive up to $100,000 for a planning grant or up to $500,000 for implementation. Now, with local food farmers market promotion programs, unlike the value-added producer grant program, you can utilize this grant to make equipment purchases. And according to federal definitions that USDA follows, equipment is considered is a tool or some sort of equipment that is portable, that's specialized, that is valued at $5,000 or more. If you go and you purchase a $4,000 bandsaw to make certain cuts, well, since it's $4,000, it's then considered a supply. But so there's some nuances there when you're applying. And some of these applications can be a bit complicated trying to keep up with the different rules and nuances as you go through it. But unlike value-added producer grant program, where in a single individual may apply, here for local food promotion, you can have a business that applies, but you definitely have to document that your project is going to benefit multiple farmers. And so it definitely has to show a community benefit, even though there may be a primary recipient for the grant. And farmers market is definitely intended for a regional marketing or a collective marketing approach. It doesn't necessarily have to be a traditional farmers market, but it does have to service a wider area and more generic type marketing, so to speak. Other federal resources that are available: USDA Economic Development Assistance Program, of course, the Small Business Administration, they have the development loan programs, and I'm sure there's plenty others that I'm probably leaving out. But before we step away from USDA loans and USDA grants, I'm going to talk just a minute about feasibility studies that Thomas and Jim mentioned earlier. It's in what we encounter on a regular basis is we'll receive a phone call and somebody wants to pursue one of these grant applications, or maybe they have this idea that they want to enter this new business. but especially for these USDA grant programs where a feasibility study is required, it's typically the feasibility study has to be performed by a third party, whether you as an individual pay for the feasibility study entirely, or whether you receive a grant to defray some of those costs. And so that feasibility study needs to look at not only the economics, but it also has to look at the technology, business management, resources, supply chains, and the markets and everything. So it can be a rather lengthy document. It takes more than a week or two to create one. So, regardless of what firm you plan to use or think you might use, there are plenty of private consultants out there that do that. I know, Virginia Fairs, we do that, and as well as some of our counterparts here tonight. So my point being is if this is something that you're interested in pursuing, then you need to look at getting your feasibility study in place first and to begin to develop your business plan. Because without those, you're really not going to get far with these grant programs. And also, these grant programs aren't going to pay for everything. More than likely, you're going to have to seek outside investors or outside lending, and those folks, they're going to want to see more than back of the envelope notes and ideas. They want to see some hard numbers. And so these types of documents can certainly help with that. And the one last thing I would say before I forget it, grants are great. Grants are not free money. They take time. As you've seen, some of them, most of them require match. There are strings, there are rules. Once you're awarded a grant, you need to comply with those strings and rules. Otherwise, you're not going to receive your money. And so it's, I like to warn everybody, grants are not free money. And by the same token, if you have a business idea or something that you're trying to pursue, I would caution you against trying to change or modify your business just to fit the grant that's open this month. Because as you can see, next month, another grant's going to be open and the rules are going to be slightly different. And so you're going to drive yourself nuts trying to conform to each one of these grant programs to make yourself eligible. So, figure out what it is you want to do and stick with that, and don't be too worried about trying to modify yourself or modify your plan to fit some of these funding sources. Okay, Appalachian Regional Commission. They definitely have a role in Virginia and the Carolinas. In fact, the commission stretches from Mississippi all the way into New York. So they provide area development program grant programs for projects that are intended to create or retain jobs and foster investment within those communities. Here again, you're going to see that state and local agencies or local governments and nonprofits, these are the institutions that are eligible to apply. So in order to be able to access those monies, that you have to be in a position and willing to work with some of these institutions in order to access this sort of funding. Again, the match requirement is going to vary by location. The rates is going to vary by location, but they're very similar to empowerment zones and opportunity zones that that many states have in throughout their entire state, and not just in the Appalachian localities. And there's more information there. You need to contact the state staff person for ARC. South Carolina funding resources. So South Carolina is considering using some of the federal COVID relief funds to expand processing. And see, the legislature is on recess until this fall. And then at that point, if the legislature approves it, and then you can expect to see the South Carolina Department of Agriculture might be the host of that grant program to begin offering some opportunities for processing there. And that may also include other food types as well. North Carolina funding resources, the biggest that I could find, and there may be some others that I may have missed, was through the Golden Leaf Foundation. This is monies that were set up from the Master Settlement Agreement years ago with the Attorneys General over tobacco. So these are agricultural grants to develop new crops, expand markets, research, training farmers, and value-added ag enterprises. And certainly meat and poultry processing would fit those definitions. And they have two different types of grant programs, the community-based and open grants. And so for the community-based, you're looking at up to 1.5 million. Again, you have to work through a locality, and they're on specific priority zones and information. The open grants program up to 200,000 for typically is the limit, but on occasion they have the flexibility to approve as much as $500,000, and that has a rolling application period. And really, to find out any more details about these programs, you need to go to the website there at goldenleaf.org and check out priorities in agriculture, and they're gonna tell you to contact the foundation directly. In Virginia, we have we're blessed to have a few more resources at hand under the Governor's Agriculture and Forest Industries Development Fund, which is managed and administered by our Virginia Department of Agriculture. Here again, you have to go through a locality. You can work on a planning grant, for a project plan. This again, it's got to be tied to support economic development, promoting agriculture and forestry. An infrastructure grant would be up to 25,000. Let's say, for example, you're in the process of building a facility, and you might run short for money on a piece of equipment, or maybe you're an existing facility, and if you don't, if you're not able to replace your cooling system, then you could shut down. So the infrastructure grant is one that could help potentially help with defray some of those costs. Again, you do have to go through the locality. The facility grant is this allows counties to support those projects up to $500,000. Again, you must add or save jobs, and it does require the use of Virginia-grown agricultural forestry commodities. So, in theory, if you're working on a project through APHID and you want to process beef, then they're part of the agreement with the county and with VDACs is going to be that you're going to be expected to utilize a set percentage of product that is grown in Virginia. So you would have to document and follow through with purchasing, X number of head of beef or pork or whatever the animal may be in the processing example. Another Virginia funding resource. In Virginia, we don't have the Golden Leaf Foundation, but we do have the Tobacco Region Revitalization Commission, the Tobacco Commission offers a business and community lending program. They have fixed rates, and you work with the localities, and again to apply. And your project must operate and spend the loan funds within the region. And that's roughly 41, 47 localities across Virginia's southern border. And specifically, there's a grant and loan program referred to as the Southside Virginia program and the Southwest Virginia program. And in here, you work with the locality, and you could receive a grant up to $500,000 or not more than 50% of your project cost. And that's equipment, building, infrastructure, supporting ag processing. Again, it must benefit multiple producers, and ideally your project would benefit multiple localities. And with that, you see my contact information there. I guess before I move to the next slide, let's see. There we go. We still have everybody's contact information. Stephen, would you like to take a start at the questions at the top of the chat? I know the first 5 or 6 were probably directed at your attention.
Yep, sure. And I could cheat because Dave Lemie is not on anymore, but I work with him. So there's 4 or 5 just from Dave. He asked if the investment is annual or one time. The question was asked, and that what he's referring to is how much would you be willing to invest on a cooperatively owned meat processing facility? The question was asked one time. So, so not a lot of money out there right off the bat. And then Stuart Ramsey asked, in your research, did you determine the current amount of capacity now has changed over the past several decades? Certainly we determined the current capacity. How it changed in the past till today probably could be easily answered if we're talking a local capacity. It's gone down. Like I said, even the Meat Processors Association, South Carolina, the fellow that ran it actually is dead. So the aging of owners, the lack of reinvestment that Jim pointed out, if you're living off depreciation and not reinvesting in the plant, plants have sold even during COVID when demand was up. We had 3 plants change hands. So at least they got reopened, but 3 got sold. 1 custom plant went down. Dave asked, is there an opportunity for a multi-state approach processor? I would think so, but a lot of the surveys I have is the farmers didn't want to drive 6 hours to, with their animals. It was like 1 to 2 hours. So a multi-state processor.
Steve, I was going to say a lot of survey work producers, 100 miles tends to be the outside limit for a lot of producers as far as interest area.
Yeah. So I asked it in terms of minutes, and the other surveys said miles, but 100 miles, hour and a half, right? 2 hours. So that's it. Jason Dempsey, I know Jason did operate a deer processor. He was trying to clarify between custom exempt plants. I was talking about custom exempt inspection, which is really not inspected. The plant itself, if you're just a deer processor, yes, the animal has to show up already killed. And that's what Jason's pointing out. But you could be a state plant or a federally inspected plant, and you tell the inspector, we're not going to be inspected today. We're doing custom exempt animals. You can do cows or whatever you want to do that day, and it's not inspected, and you can't label it. And then Andrea asked about organic certification. Yes, there's not. That was one of my questions to processors. It basically was a cost thing. They had to, stop, clean up, use different soaps, all that sort of thing for only a couple of their clients that wanted organic. So I think if there was a critical mass of people that wanted organic processing and could maybe take a whole day of capacity, you might have a shot. And I think that might be Yes, that's it for me on my questions. Dave, I think Jim said something about cooperatives in the South and Mid-Atlantic and the Midwest. I think it's just mostly comments. Does anybody want to answer the state having programs to teach processing? That is an issue in all states. And in South Carolina, we're having a meeting on it next week. And there's that grant that Tony mentioned. Anybody else want to comment on that?
I know, I know at Virginia Tech, they have a program that's available for undergrads. I'm not certain that they take that on the road or have offer continuing education in that. And I think down a little bit lower, Paul Bolden mentioned that he and some other farms in Virginia are helping teach processing for swine and small ruminants. And I see that he mentioned the Virginia Pork Council has sponsored some workshops along with the Culinary Institute of Virginia. And I would add that I do recall the University of Tennessee had a program for a while. I'm not really certain what the status is of that at this point. And just to go back to the organic certification, depending on the markets that you're trying to fill, we also see a limitation on those facilities that are able to offer kosher or halal services.
A lot of comments back and forth on trainings. South Carolina currently does not, but again, working on it. Tony mentioned something about Virginia. I thought there was a question for Thomas here. That was, what size cooperative are you talking about? Is we value in small meat processing cooperatives, perhaps covering a 2 or 3 county region?
I answered that in the chat, but I can again. And I think, we've seen that the larger the animal, the more capital intensive the processing facility becomes. And so it may be possible for small animals to have a smaller local facility for smaller producers of smaller animals. But, when you're getting into larger animals, basically you need volume in order to make it financially feasible. And so you will need to serve a geographically larger region.
Jim, you want
And I was going to make it. Sorry, Steve. I was going to make a comment too, and Steve is actually one who often talks to me about this, which I'm kind of surprised that he wasn't the first one to mention it. Is that the co-ops don't have to be just for processing; they could also be for transportation and for services or other things at the farm level. So there's a lot of other activities, or even potentially for veterinary or other type of services as well. So although we're here talking about meat processing, there's a lot of auxiliary areas that could potentially benefit as well.
And then Jim, since you're on the spot, it's our favorite recurring question about mobile processing for, somebody asked about mobile processing for swine and cattle. So basically red meat, large animal.
And we've got some stuff, and that may be a good follow-up, but when you're getting to larger animals, it gets harder on the inspection side often for the mobile processing unit. And sometimes the short cynical answer is sometimes it's easier to move the animals than it is to move inspectors.
And less costly.
And less costly, right? So, because often you have to pay inspectors from the time they leave their home office if they're doing mobile slaughter. And so often that becomes a prohibitive cost factor within there. It can be done. It has worked on some specialized situations with it. The other issue you have to be able to deal with is particularly keeping the animals separate for flies and pathogens. So you have to have some controlled areas within there. And so there has been some work, and there's been some interest also in sort of a modified, mobile processing where you're going to sort of a docking unit type of thing as well.
And I would add with, one of the attendees mentioned the Virginia State University's new mobile processing unit for small ruminants. That's so not only is that mobile facility going to be under inspection, but the locations where that mobile facility sets up, I believe those site locations are also going to be associated with the permit. So that's something else to keep in mind. It's you're just not going to be able to pull it up at anybody's barnyard or out in anyone's pasture and go to work. It's going to take a little more effort and coordination than that.
And then a new one, are there benchmark prices paid by customers of the facilities in our states, range of cost for slaughter, cut and wrap, value added? Honestly, a lot of those are on the websites that I looked at, or you just call and ask. But anybody else have any comments? I don't know if there's a benchmark price. Every time I try to name one, it's got, you know what I mean? There's so many pieces. Like sometimes it's like the kill fee plus the hide disposal fee plus the cutting and wrapping fee, and then you get a per pound fee. But any other comments on that? So I would guess I just do research by calling.
I think that the constraint has been for a lot of people is getting time, getting space, even more than paying the price at this point in time. Has been issues just even finding, locations. And I think we're hearing stories from numerous folks of needing to have spots, 7 or 8, even 9 months in advance to even just be able to have a spot in a facility.
And then I think it's the final question is discuss models that involve shipping trailer loads of cattle to larger facility for efficient slaughter and then bringing back hanging sides and primal cuts for smaller low-cost facility cut and wrap. I would just say, I think that's a good model. I mean, if you can find somebody that will kill only, and they'll have to chill it down, I imagine, to under the, was it 38 degrees? I have to look up my regs every time. And then you can take that carcass or whatever back to your facility, but you'd have to have a refrigerated truck and all that. But I think the cutting of the portioning of the animal is where the expense and a lot of the bottlenecks are. So that could be a good model. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, I was gonna say you also can have less regulatory issues once you get away from the actual slaughter. I mean, some of these cutting and things can even be done in, old, grocery stores and other type of facilities and this sort of thing. You don't need nearly the amount of issue from inspection or water usage as well.
And oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to mention the most recent question here. Once the panic meat buying subsides, what do you expect consumer demand will be? Personally, I think it's still going to continue to be strong. I mean, we were witnessing I guess a gradual increasing growth in demand for local meat products, and basically the pandemic just pushed it over on steroids all at once. So
Seen it subside though, judging on wait times for facilities. So I think it's probably fallen back to the trend line that it was on, but it's up a notch, right? It was on a growing trajectory, just local meats in general, and then up and still growing. Okay, Jason clarified 40 degrees.
Thanks, Jason.
The other thing too is, I mean, that's why, but I still think we ought to work on markets at the same time, getting more of this meat in consumers' hands and making sure it's appropriate quality and all that, because what could have happened during the pandemic, I worry, is people were desperate for meat and they got a grass-fed cow that hadn't been touched in 3 years, and they probably got some tough stuff. I don't know, but you want to make sure that eating experience is pleasant, and let's hope that not too many people got a hold of the wrong animal or, didn't know what they were getting when they bought during the pandemic. Any final comments from the panel before we close her down? And we'll send everybody a link to the recording and a copy of the slides. And also, if everybody wouldn't mind doing a survey, I have a link for a survey for the evaluation. You can also give us more feedback on what you'd like to hear more about and all that.
That's what I was going to press, is that, we're looking at this a little bit. If folks are interested in this being sort of an opening salvo to find out where people want to go deeper, we put on a lot of topics very, very quickly. So if there's some area that folks are interested in, by all means, fill out the survey, because that's what we're going to use to move forward.
Let's see, we have one. What are the benefits for a local meat market? It's the last question.
Benefits for a local meat market?
What are the benefits for a local meat market?
Or benefits of, I guess. And Jason, you can always email me and call me. But I think the benefits are that we need buying points for local products. And we also need it for seafood and other items where people don't actually know where they can get them, but they would buy them if they would. And so I think the benefit, and Jim and I were just at a meeting last week, if it's a cooperatively owned market, you're spreading those overhead costs and those labor costs, and you're increasing the supply because you have a number of producers to actually stock the market. So there could be a number of benefits.
And I think it goes back to what Stephen was saying about, consumers not wanting to travel more than 20 miles. You have to make it easy for the consumer, and I also think that's a place where you can work on differentiating some of these different products that people were talking about, where you're doing the organic, where, it doesn't have to be all one size fits all. You can do organic, you can do grass fed, you can do, Wagyu if you want that to be it on the beef side, but you can lay out different types of products that, meets what your consumer wants, because you always do best when you're meeting their demand as opposed to trying to educate them.
And yes, we'll be able to save the chat as well. And if there's any questions you missed, we'll be sure we circle back and catch up with you all.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for attending. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Have a good evening. Thanks for spending your afternoon, evening with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.